Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is starting the beginning of a new series of videos that's focused more on server-side rendering. Again, we're going to do it with Express, just because why not? But again, the concepts in this video series applies to any web framework when you're using server-side templates. So I will be using Express with EJS, but this could apply to Express with any other library, Pug, Handlebars, Boxwood, Express React Views, you name it. So it doesn't really matter what the templating library is. It doesn't necessarily matter what the language is. The concepts are the same. Now, in the previous set of videos where I was making all these different front ends, the idea was like that was one way of architecting an app, which is called a single page application. So the idea is your backend delivers a JSON API, and then your entire view is handled in the front end by your JavaScript using a front end framework like React or Vue or Angular or any of the things that we tried out in that series of videos. Now, traditionally the way it was done before really that became the thing is you'd use server-side rendering, where your backend server, instead of producing a JSON API, it would render the HTML pages on the server, and you would create like a template, and then you can fill in the spots with the template, and then it returns the HTML file. Benefits of this is you kind of hide basically all your user sees is just the data that needs to be rendered on the page. Okay, you're not exposing more data than you need to the view, because again you're rendering it on the server outside of the purview of the on top of it's better for SEO, because basically the browser is receiving the already rendered page, which means search engine crawlers will be more readily be able to see like all the content on the website for search engine indexing. Now the reason why people moved away from that was because they weren't, when you back end render a page, it kind of limits what you have to do for interactivity of the website, because you can't really render on the back end front end reactivity, like the ability that you click a button and then something pops up over here or whatnot, all that kind of like reactive magic on the front end. You could, but then you would have to bring in something like jQuery and a script tag. So basically you have all these templates on top of it, they're linked to all these JavaScript files with all this jQuery, and it wasn't necessarily the best way to do things either. Okay, so we're gonna get into templating, but nowadays you have some newer libraries, particularly Alpine and HTMX, that aim to kind of more broadly solve this problem. And then there's like the person who made Alpine has also made some framework specific things like Laravel's Livewire that is in the same premise. But the idea here is this: you still use server-side templating to build sort of the initial page, but then you sprinkle in some reactivity using a library like Alpine and HTMX, where basically they allow you to kind of write the reactivity in your HTML. So that's kind of like their intention. They sit there and say, okay, hey, how about this? How about less JavaScript? Instead, you just have sprinkle in a few directives that will allow you to make stuff conditionally show up on the page and things like that. It's still front-end JavaScript, but it's more like sprinkling some reactivity versus taking over the whole page, the rendering of the whole page using a framework. So you get the benefits of server-side rendering, you get the benefits of client-side reactivity, but in a sort of neater package theoretically. So I actually haven't tried these out, Alpine, HTMX, so you're going to be in the right for me. So in this first video, we'll set up our server and just kind of reacquaint ourselves with server-side rendering with EJS and building an Express server. Then the next video, we'll implement Alpine. Okay? So let's see here. What we're going to do is we have a blank folder here. So I'm going to be working on this blank folder, and I'm going to open up the terminal. Since we're creating an Express server, the first thing we want to do is npm init npm init-y. That's going to create me my package.json. Okay, I'm going to create my server.js, node touch server.js. While I'm at it, let me make some folders. Make dir controllers, models, views. Okay. I'm not going to worry about working with a database for this piece. Actually, maybe we will. So we'll say DB. Good. Okay, and then I want to npm install express EJS Morgan. I don't necessarily need cores library, because if you're doing server-side rendering, then you don't have two applications making requests to each other. It's just one application. So then the whole cores consideration kind of goes out the window. So I don't need cores, because again, all the requests will be same origin. So in that case, that's no longer a problem. But I still would want. I think I got everything I want here. Let me just get method override just in case. I don't think I'll need it, but yeah, I didn't find method override because it's not spelled that way. So like method override, if I'm right, or actually we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Cool. So we got all that. Now, oh, and let me also make a public folder. Okay, and then again, all this stuff will be in my repo for my videos repo. So it's my videos repo where I have like code from all these videos, with the exception of like those recent zero day deploy videos. Each of those have their own repo in those video descriptions. Okay, so let's start creating the server. So const require const express. So you can tell I literally just woke up, but you can always see it's like it's the same time I do these videos in the morning, like right before I start work. Const express require express const Morgan equals require Morgan. Okay, and actually let me just set up my package.json here. Okay, so I'm going to set up my scripts. Okay, and actually that reminds me, well, let's do the start script first. Start node server.js. Okay, so it's also npm install nodamon. Actually, first I want to make sure that we do save dev, so it's a dev dependency, and nodamon. Okay. Now I'm going to do my dev script here, and this is going to be port 3000. So I'm going to define an environmental variable, and I'm going to say nodamon server.js, and then here I'm going to say port 4000. It's just that way I can kind of tell like if I'm running the start command or the dev command, because I'll see like the port output. Okay, so that's good for me. Okay, so let's go back to our server.js. Const Morgan, const. Actually, I think that's probably it for the moment. Oh, did I install Mongoose? Let's check here, package.json. No, I didn't install Mongoose. So let's do that. npm install Mongoose. Okay. Now let's create the express object. So again, import dependencies. I always like putting like the little titles. Make it easy to understand what the sections of my code are. Dependencies. Okay, the application object. Const app equals express. Then let's register some middleware. Okay, so now here, what I'm going to want to do is do const app.use I want to use Morgan. Tiny. I'm going to use app.use express.json just in case we need to have any JSON bodies. App.use, although I spelled express wrong. Express.url encoded in case we need to do any form bodies. And then again, this receives an object that was it body parser. So use new. I think it's extended. I think extended equals true. Okay, and I also want to do app.use express.static. This is going to allow us to have a statically served folder, which will be the public folder. Okay, and actually I want to put that a little bit ahead of the game, because if they're requesting some page like an index.html that I have in the public folder, there's no need to go beyond and do these things, so I'd rather just have that earlier on. But I want the log, so I'm going to have that happen first. And I think that's good. Now let's just test out, make sure that our EJS is working. So here's going to be our routes and routers. Okay, and we're going to say app.get slash, and we're going to say rec.res. And the cool thing about like EJS is that usually that works right out of the box with Express. So a lot of the other like templating libraries usually have to like, set the view engine and then determine the file type and all that stuff. If you've seen, I have a blog post on the different templating engines in Express over there in my blog post. Actually, let's see here. Let me go bring it up. So if you go to toots.alexmerced.coder.com, if we look up Control F, we just look up template. Okay. Okay, maybe not that. Let's say Express. Here we go. Intro to Express, templating and APIs, EJ's, handlebars, mustache plug. So that kind of shows you like the setup for each one. So that's a good one to check out. Okay, and it's because of this shift back to like server side rendering, where like PHP is making a big comeback with like Laravel and Livewire and all that stuff. But let's see here. When you're using front end, server side templates with EJS, since technically I don't have to configure anything, all I have to do is just make sure that I have a file in my views folder. Again, it's by your views is always going to like any templating engines by default going to look inside that views folder. So in that views folder, I need to have a file that matches the extension. So it would be like index.ejs. Okay, and we're going to say hello world. Just an H1 that says hello world for now. Okay, goody. And basically what we do is we do a response, because again this stands for the request and response object. And I'm going to say for the response I want to render something, so res.render, and then we put in the name of the template, which will be index, and then I can pass it an object, and we'll just say hello world. We'll double check if that works in a second. And then all we have left is our listener. And we're going to say app.listen. Okay, and then process.env.port. So it's that environmental variable I defined earlier. And we're going to say that console.log. You are listening on port process.env.port. Okay, so let's try this out. npm run dev. Okay, so I'm listening on port 3000. Okay, so set this up. Whee! Okay. Localhost 3000. Okay, no default engine was, so I think it wants me to actually specify the extension, and that'll figure it out. So if I refresh, yep, that's the deal. Yeah, like if you don't specify it, you need the extension, and then it's what's going to do is based on the extension, it'll determine what the library is. That's why EJS works, because since the extension is EJS, it looks for the EJS library and it just works. Okay, cool. So that works. Now the cool thing about EJS, which stands for Embedded JavaScript, and this is like the same as like Embedded Ruby or Jinja, very similar in the sense where it allows you to just write HTML and then you can inject bits of that language, in this case JavaScript. And the way I would do that, so if I go back to like that index.ejs, and the idea is that I'm rendering this template index.ejs, but I'm making this object of data available to that template. So I can go back here and just say, and just be like percentage, that's like the EJS symbol, and then if you want to print something, you put an equal sign there, and then you close that off with like this, so that's kind of like an EJS tag, and then I want to use that variable called hello that was in that object, and I just say that, and I'm going to get hello world. Okay, but let's just, so you can see the difference, let me just change this to like goodbye world. Okay, cool. Let's see, it's going to render whatever is in this object under that variable name. Okay, so this is generally going to be how our data gets to our web page. Okay, so when we're using things like Alpine and HTMX, they're not necessarily like handling the receiving and getting of data so much more than they're dealing with sort of handling the reactivity on the front end and kind of limiting the need for JavaScript. Instead, we're going to have our templates kind of really be the receiver of state and rendering the state onto a template. Okay, so that is kind of how that's going to work. Now again, just to also show you, since I have this public folder, what I can do here is I can just make static files. So if I just really just want to make an arbitrary HTML file, we'll say cheese.html, and then just say here, you know, cheese. Okay, then I would just type in here /cheese.html, because essentially this public folder is relative to that root URL. So technically that's going to be like localhost 3000 /cheese.html, and if I hit enter on that, I get cheese. So just so you know, that's what the public folder is for statically serving files. So you're not going to render anything. You're not rendering it on the client. You're not rendering it on the server. You just have a pre-made static HTML file that you would like to serve it. You put it in that public folder because that's what our server is statically serving, meaning it just sends the file. Okay, so user sends a request, the server just relays the file, and then that's kind of it. So now let's set up Alpine and HTMX, and then we'll call this video done. Okay, so now Alpine here, basically install that. What we want to do is put that in a script tag. But the thing is that we're going to want that HTMX, HTME. What do you think about that? Do we? Yeah, we'll just kind of put it on this index.ejx for now. Okay, we'll leave it at that. I'm not going to worry about rendering layouts. Okay, so in that case, here I got my HTML boilerplate, and what I want to do, and I copy this CDN link, put that in the head tag, kind of like you put in jQuery. Okay, so now I have access to Alpine, and I'm going to do the same for HTMX. Okay, quick start. Okay, so here's the script tag, copy, add that as well. And there we're going to have both of those available to us to use on the page. Okay, and we'll get into how those work in the oncoming videos, but essentially that's the setup. Okay, you just essentially have these two files, or one of them. They're two separate frameworks, but you could use them both. They both have slightly different things that they do. So essentially, what Alpine does is that it's going to allow us to sit there and kind of like be able to define state right in our HTML, but like very basic state, like not like all the data, because the data should be rendered by the template, but things like a Boolean on whether a part of the page should show up or not. So we can do things like, you know, iterating, local logic, conditional logic, stuff like that. Stuff you can't really do in a template because, again, the template gets rendered up front and doesn't do any further rendering afterwards because you're no longer on the server once it hits the browser. And then HTMX, the way I understand it is that you can click on certain buttons, and what it does, it's making a request to your server for a bit of HTML and replaces the HTML parts of your website. Okay. Now Alpine has something like, the guy who made Alpine did something like that with what's called Livewire for Laravel. That's kind of like how that works. So essentially you would connect Livewire in part of your Laravel project, which is a PHP framework, and essentially what's happening is that instead of making JSON requests, you're requesting pre-rendered bits of HTML, and it's replacing them on the page. So it still gives you that sort of single page application feel, but you're not having to worry about all the hassles of dealing with creating a JSON API and all the other considerations that come with that. You're just dealing with HTML snippets and swapping them out, which is kind of a cool approach. Okay, I never really thought about that. So that's the reason I want to do these videos, because I'd like to try it out. But before we do that, I think this video we introduced a setup. Now in the next video we'll play with Alpine, and in the third video we'll play with HTMX. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.